What's this? A letter for me.
Welcome to another episode of Remember the Great Sports Through the Mail Thursdays. Today I'm going to share with you some recent returns that I just got back in the mail. So let me jump right into these and see who we got. Alright, this first one is postmarked from St. Louis, Missouri, and is indeed a return from former football St. Louis Cardinal Mark Arneson on 1, 2, and 3. And I want to say that I had a fourth in there, and it was either a double of this card or this card, and he decided to keep the extra duplicate, which is perfectly fine. But very happy to get Mark Arneson back. So let me tell you a little bit about his career. Mark Arneson was born in Iowa. However, he relocated with his family to Arizona when he was in high school. He attended high school in Arizona, then later went to college for the University of Arizona and was part of their football program. While at Arizona, he made a name for himself, and during his career at Arizona, he had a total of 357 tackles while playing linebacker, and a total of 171 assisted tackles. He led the team in assisted tackles in 1969 and 70 and led the team in unassisted tackles in 1970. He was also a two-time first-team All-WAC conference selection in 1970 and 71. Well, he was drafted by the Cardinals in the second round with the 32nd pick. And when he got to St. Louis at 23 years old, he was thrown into the starting lineup, starting 10 games his rookie season, appearing in 14, and playing middle linebacker for the Cardinals. In 1973, however, he was not a starter and only started in 4 games for the Cardinals. But in 1974, he would return to the starting lineup, starting in 11 of the 14 games. And pretty much from there forward, he would be a starter middle linebacker at the age of 25 for the St. Louis Cardinals, all the way until the 1980 season. Overall, he would appear in 127 games as a linebacker for the St. Louis Cardinals Football Club. He would start in 104 of those games, having 5 interceptions during that span. I'm not too sure what he did post-playing career, but he did remain in the St. Louis area after his retirement because the address I used, if I believe, was in St. Louis, so he's still, to this day, in St. Louis. And just to rewind a little bit, the St. Louis Cardinals are the Arizona Cardinals for some of the younger viewers that may not be aware of that. Similar to how the New York Giants were named the New York Giants when they played baseball before they moved to San Francisco, St. Louis actually had 2 teams with the same name. The St. Louis Cardinals that played baseball and the St. Louis Cardinals that played football. And that's going to lead me to my next return because I believe it possibly could be a teammate of Mr. Arneson's. And this one is indeed postmarked from Alabama. And it is a return indeed from former Cardiac Cardinals center Tom Banks on 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Tom Banks, who was the center, literally, and the center of the offensive line for the St. Louis Cardinals for many years, was an all-pro for those Cardinals, and we're going to talk about his career a little bit. So Tom Banks grew up in Alabama. He attended high school in Alabama, and he was actually recruited to play for Bear Bryant. However, he chose to attend Auburn over the famed Bear Bryant teams at Alabama. And at Auburn, he had an illustrious career playing center for the Auburn Tigers, and then was drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1970 draft. However, he had to sit out his first year playing for the Cardinals due to injury, and did not really get off the ground, so to speak, until his second year in the league. So he bounced back after his rookie year was pretty much shelved, And in 1971, he started 7 of 9 games for the Cardinals at center. The following year, he would play in all 14 games at center for the Cardinals, starting 11. And in 1973, he would start all 14 games at center for the Cardinals. However, the injury bug returned in 1974 for Banks, and he was injured and only played in 1 game the entire 1974 season. Well, despite the previous injuries that hampered Banks' career, he was able to bounce back in 1975, and he appeared in 14 of 14 games for the Cardinals and made his very first All-Pro team as a St. Louis Cardinal at center. He would follow up the 76, 77, and 78 season, making the All-Pro teams. You can see it's designated on the card as an All-Pro. And he would run a stretch of 4 years making those teams. In 1979, he would again start 14 games for the Cardinals, appearing in 14 of them. And by 1980, he was relegated to only 6 games and retired after the 1980 season, appearing in only those 6 games. Overall in his career, he appeared in 116 games at center for the Cardinals. He was kind of the centerpiece of the offensive line for those teams. He was considered the team leader, or whatever you want to say, with that team. He was a very, very good player for, the time period that he played in the 1970s. After only appearing in a few games in 1980 for the Cardinals, he did retire from the NFL. However, he would resurface in 1983 and 1984, playing for the Birmingham Stallions of the USFL, the now defunct USFL, in 1983 and 84. In 1999, Banks was named to the 50th anniversary Senior Bowl all-time team in college, having played in the 1970 game. In 2000, he was inducted into the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame. So, very happy to add Mr. Banks to the collection. Another one of those very, very underrated players from the 1970s. You just don't hear a lot about, offensive linemen in general, even in today's game. But this was one of the best back in the day. And I'm very happy to add his autograph to the collection. And also, just take a look at this guy. Would you want to mess with this dude? I'm just saying. That'd be a pretty intimidating guy to be, across from you if you're playing defense. Now, the final one is a return from Phoenix, Arizona. And that is former Philadelphia Eagle great Carl Hairston on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I apologize about it being all the same card, but at the time that I wrote him, these were the only cards that I had of him. Since then, I have purchased many, many football cards, to say it nicely, and I have a nice wide variety of Carl Hairston cards if I were to send to him again. But at the time, these were the only 4 that I had. So I had no problem, sending these extras to him in case he wanted to keep a couple. Fortunately for me, he decided he didn't want to keep any. So let me tell you a little bit about Carl Big Daddy Hairston. Hairston grew up in Virginia. He attended Maryland Eastern Shore or Maryland State University. I'm not really sure which they go by now. And played defensive end, defensive tackle, and linebacker while in college and high school. He was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles in the 7th round of the 1976 draft. In 1976, he would start 9 of 14 games for the Eagles, and after that season, he was a starter in 1977 in all 14 games of that season. From 1976 to 1983, Hairston will be a staple of the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line, playing defensive tackle and defensive end. In 1984, he would leave to go to the Cleveland Browns. However, he was not a starter with the Browns, And by 1985, he was back in the starting lineup for the Browns, appearing in 16 of 16 games for the team. He would spend 1984 to 1989 doing the same thing he did in Philadelphia. And at 38 years old, he would sign a contract with the now Phoenix Cardinals, which were what I mentioned earlier, the St. Louis Cardinals, and played in 16 games, but only started 3 of them that year. So in total, he played for 15 years in the NFL, and that is just amazing that somebody could have played 224 games over that time period from basically 1976 to 1990. So this is one of those rare occurrences in the NFL where an athlete can say that they played in 3 different decades in the NFL. Of course, 1990 being the last year that he played. But I still think for an offense or a defensive lineman or any player for that matter, outside of maybe a quarterback, that playing in 3 different decades to the age of 38 years old is an amazing feat. And the other amazing part about Mr. Hairston is, despite playing this long in the league, you would think that he would be one of the most noteworthy all-pro defensive players ever. He never once made a Pro Bowl or an all-pro team during his entire career. So even though he wasn't one of the elite, he was still a very good player for a very long time. And this is one of those underrated players from the 1970s and 80s, I guess you would say too, technically. And if you're an autograph collector, this guy is a legend. He has tons of cards out there. Again, I apologize about having 4 of the same here. If you're interested in trading for one of them, I'm definitely game for that, for a equal type of player of that caliber. So if you're watching this video and you're interested in one of these, definitely let me know. I want to thank you for joining me for another episode. I want to thank Mr. Tom Banks also for signing. And I again want to thank Mr. Arneson of the Cardinals for signing as well. Thanks for joining me for another episode. I look forward to your comments below.